Okay, we're going to just stop for a minute.
This boy that was at my party, I later lost track of him because as my school went bankrupt and I changed schools, I went to an all-girls school. But years later, after Israel, just when Israel was starting, I heard the sad news that he was one of the 35 who were murdered by the Arabs in Gush Etzion when the whole place was completely destroyed and all the people murdered. So that's another sad thing that happened. As I said, that my school went bankrupt. I moved to another school. My parents moved to this new place that belonged to the Russian.
Where was the new location?
It was, in a way, quite a nice place. It was not far. It was exactly opposite the old Hadassah Hospital, long before they built a new one. The Hadassah Hospital was up on the hill. Actually, it used to be in the late 19th century the most fashionable street. There were so many important people who had lived there. We lived right next to the old American consulate, and very famous people had lived in that street before, mostly before we. Ben Yehuda himself, the guy who started the Hebrew language again, he had lived there, and the famous poetess Rachel, and a famous British painter, I forgot his name. So it had been a very famous street. It's called the Street of the Prophets. Street of the Prophets, our number was 278, I won't forget. That was our house.
Your father was an attorney at that time?
No, not when we moved there. No. We stayed in that place many years. But when we moved there, no, he was selling his cheeses.
Okay.
Well, my parents saw that I was very uncomfortable, so they bought me a little dog, and that was my brother for 16 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
What kind of dog was it?
He was a mixture, a fox terrier kind of, but very sweet.
Dog.
Yeah, but he was I loved him very much, and he really helped me.
Companion.
A good companion. Anyway, about my new school, it was not too far from my house. You could walk, and it was a very good school. It was a British school, Jewish, British, Orthodox, anti-Zionist. Exactly the opposite of what my parents were. My parents were completely secular and Zionists, and this school was the opposite. My parents didn't really know about that. All they knew is that it's a good disciplinarian school. We had to wear uniforms, and you learned English, which was important living under the British people. It was a good school, but it made me unhappy. It was lots of discipline, and I got punished quite a few times because everybody got punished, but especially I was one of...
Were there a lot of students there?
Yes, I think a few hundred.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was so strict. We were not allowed to do anything. We weren't allowed to go to the movies in the evening, even with our parents. We weren't allowed to be members of any, like Girl Scouts or other organizations. We were supposed...
Okay, now.
The school was very strict, and I wasn't happy there. And being an only child, I didn't have many friends. At home, we continued to speak German the whole time until my parents passed away. With my grandmother and with my parents, I always spoke German. So Hebrew was for me a kind of foreign language.
And English,
And English, well, English I learned
Well, you learned a
easier.
little
I
English
learned in school like everybody else.
But you did not practice it at home.
Not at home, no. And I wasn't a good student. I had, especially in Hebrew, I was very bad. I loved mathematics. It was a pleasure for me, and I was very good at it. I was quite good at drawing, painting, and English. But Hebrew was terrible. Anyway, I was very often alone, and one day I found among the things of in my parents, which I wasn't supposed to touch, a picture of my father marching with the underground. So I thought, well, if what my father can hide from me, I can hide from him. So I approached one of my classmates and asked her. I knew she was in an organization underground, so I asked her if she could help me, and she, after a few days, she told me to go to a school at a certain time and they will give me instructions. So I came there. There were 2 other people sitting waiting. They called us into a room, one at a time. It was completely dark there, just a candle burning. They asked me all kinds of questions, and if I would say anything to the British if I was caught, and so on. And I gave the right answers. They told me to go back outside and wait, and after a while, after everybody was in, they called us in, and then we had to swear by the Bible that we would give our lives to Israel and would never say anything, betray our people.
It was boys and girls, I take it.
No, yes, in that group there was.
Yeah.
But then they told me where to go and how I had to come for a weekend somewhere. So I asked my parents to go to a girlfriend. I was lying. Well, my father had lied, hadn't told me the truth, so I decided I could do the same. So I said I'm going to my girlfriend for the weekend, and then I went to this camp that was in Jerusalem, something like a kind of enclave, and there we learned to use ammunition.
Wow.
We had to take them apart, clean them, and put them together again. And it wasn't just one weekend, it happened quite a few times. And then once they took us out into the desert for shooting and throwing real hand grenades, yes.
Were they carbines? Were they rifles, the ones that you were taking apart and shooting?
There were pistols, there was a Browning, there was forgot the names of them,
okay,
but
there was pistols and rifles.
Pistols and rifles. They were Czech rifles. The only country that gave Israel, the Jewish people anything. Nobody would give us any ammunition. So we learned and we practiced. And then after a while, they told me to come twice. 2 evenings a week, and I always went to my girlfriend for my parents, and
So
she knew about it, and she covered up for me. And I would go to it was a very Orthodox family, and they had to let me in and stand by the window half the night, I think, about 4 or 5 hours at a time, and it was overlooking a British camp. And I had to write down in a book every movement, every soldier, whatever happened there, I had to write down in a notebook. Wow. That was my first duties there. And then I had other things to do. I had to send some leaflets or hang them up in some places. There were different jobs that I got.
Did you feel good about having these responsibilities?
I felt that I was doing my duty.
Yeah,
we had to do
important.
it.
Yeah.
It was very important because the British were absolutely horrible, the way they treated us. There are so many stories, I don't want to go into everything about it in my book. But they let the Arabs do everything, and the Jewish people, they would go and search everywhere, and if they found any ammunition, they would take them away and put the people in prison. So the Jewish people had no recourse to even defend themselves, whereas the Arabs were even given ammunition by the British. It was very
It was not fair.
It was terrible. So slowly things went from bad to worse with the British, and that's it. And at the end, they were going to leave. Now, some terrible things were happening in 1947. That's when I finished school and I went to university. My father wanted me to study, and he paid for it, so he decided what I was going to study, which I didn't like. I wanted to study math and English, and he wanted me to study economics and sociology and statistics, which I liked, statistics, but not economics. So I wasn't a very good student at university either at that time. But he paid for it, so I didn't have much to say. Unfortunately, after 2 months at university, the Arabs surrounded it. They murdered 72 doctors and nurses, while the British were looking. The British were looking, and they burned them on the way to where the Hadassah Hospital was and the Hebrew University. They were all murdered. And we couldn't get to university anymore, so we went. I was working for a little while in the British government, and then I was full-time soldier. So I was became a soldier in the Israeli Defense Forces, and I was there for almost 2 years.
How many? 2?
Almost 2 years. There was no university. Everybody was a soldier. Not only me, my parents. My father was a soldier, and my mother cooked for the army, because everybody, especially Jerusalem, we were besieged for 2.5 months, where we had got no food, no water, no nothing. Fortunately, the Jewish agency had locked up all the wells in Jerusalem, and they gave us very small portions of water. That's how we survived. We had water through those wells, because we had no more electricity, no water, nothing. The Arabs had cut everything off. So Jerusalem was in very hard times. And as I said, my father was a legal advisor and wrote many of the laws that were produced at the time. And he said that there wasn't much time left because there was no more food left in Jerusalem. But then there was a ceasefire for a short time, so food was brought in, and then they broke the ceasefire, and there was another one. Anyway, my father was told by the Jewish people, the new government in making, that he should not be a soldier anymore, because he suffered also a lot. He was defending a monastery that was in Jerusalem. It's called Notre Dame, and his best friend died in his arms while they were defending the one window that they were told to do. And for 3 days we didn't know where my father was. Then he came home, he was white. His hair had turned white in 3 days. And the government said they needed him for more important jobs. He should not serve in the army anymore. So became an advisor to the minister the Jewish minister in the new government. So he worked for Dov Yosef was the minister, and he had been the supervisor of all of Jerusalem, and then he became the minister of trade and industry, and my father was a legal advisor for him. But then Ben-Gurion decided, after Israel was declared a state, he declared that the government was in Tel Aviv. So my father had to, that was 48, 49. Yeah. My parents had to move to Tel Aviv because the job was then, the government started off in Tel Aviv. But after about 2 years, Ben-Gurion wanted Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel, so they moved back. And so my parents moved back.
A lot of moving.
And yeah. And my father wanted me to come back home. Oh, by the time when my parents, as I was studying at the Hebrew University, yeah, as I said, for about 1.5 years, there were no students. Everybody was a soldier. But they needed students. They needed people to have a higher education. So any student, any soldier who had been a student before going to the army was released early so they could open the universities and have students again. But we had to study in town, again a monastery was made into the Hebrew University. It's called Terra Santa. It's on King George Street. And that's where we studied. So I went back to studying. And then my father wanted me back home when he moved back to Jerusalem, and I didn't want to go back to my father because he was very strict. I remember once while
Did your mother get along with your father and you?
Not too much, no. My mother was a very warm-hearted, wonderful woman. And my father was not a bad guy. He was a very good guy, but he was so strict. An example is once I had a colleague from another soldier who wanted to go out with me to a movie. So he picked me up at home, and my father took him and he gave him the 3rd degree. What his parents do, what does he do? I mean, we weren't thinking of engage or any, we weren't even girlfriend, nothing. It was just picking me up to go to a movie. Very harmless thing. But I felt very uncomfortable with my father, and I didn't want to go back home. And so I lived in a student home. And there I met a guy, and he proposed to me, and I said yes. And I wanted to get married, not to go back home to my parents. That was a big mistake in one way because it was
on your part. I mean, in other words, you did not get your parents' approval to marry.
The strange thing is, my mother went with me to see his family, and the family is a wonderful family, but he's the black sheep of the family. Unfortunately, he's passed away in the meantime. His family was a wonderful family. We only knew at that time his sister, who was also there, because the parents had been great Zionists. Father was the head of the Zionist organization in Romania. His mother was the head of Vitro in Romania. They had both been in prison for years because of that, of being Jewish and Zionist. And so only his uncle and his sister were there. And we met them, and my parents approved of them and let me marry him, because they really were nice people. But he was not. He had been sent by his parents.
You mean the one that you married was not?
It was not, yeah. His parents had sent him to Palestine to study. And then there came World War II, so he went to the war. And then he went back to study, but he never took it seriously. And then came another war, so he went to the war again. And then he went back to study, but he never studied. And he quarreled with his professors. And I think threw him out of the university at the end. But he was a troublemaker. He fought with many people, and
While you were married.
also while I was married,
Yeah.
and he was 30 years old. He was a virgin. He had been in Italy. You know, every soldier in Italy had 20 girls.
Yeah.
He never had one. So he was a strange person, and he was lazy. Never worked except being in the army, and it was a very difficult time.
Did you sense any of this before
I
you
did-
married him?
Not before I married him, but
Did you realize these things afterwards?
yes, after 6 months I wanted to get out, and my parents called his uncle and aunt, and they all talked me over that would be a shame, that there's no divorce in our family. They made me go back to him, and I did. Unfortunately, I did. And one good thing came out of it. I have a wonderful son.
Oh, good.
Yeah, from that. But when my father passed away, I immediately divorced. And it was hard. He didn't want me to divorce him. I left him everything. We lived in a very bad place, but I made it very nice. My parents gave us furniture, and I had an uncle who was an architect. With the help of him, I built a little corridor or something to connect the toilet and bathroom with the rooms, so we won't have to go through a courtyard. In winter in Israel, the rain, it's so cold and wet. It's very difficult. So I made it a nice place. I left him the house, I left him the furniture, even my clothes, everything.
He did not appreciate all the things you did
No,
for him?
nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. He wanted me to stay. He didn't want me, but finally
It's like you were taking care of him, kind of.
Yeah. Finally, I made him go to study to be a surveyor. Yeah, and he went to study while I was working. I was the person who worked and had the money for to survive. I supported the family. After a year, finally got a job. And he stayed in that job for the rest of his life. He worked for the Jewish agency as a surveyor. But he had a lot of troubles. Many times he quarreled and came home beaten and beating others. Years later, when I wasn't even in Israel anymore, and I had met his parents only one single time, they wanted to meet. After we were divorced, his parents were released from Romania, came to Israel. They wanted to meet me. And my mother said, just for the sake of your son, you should meet them. So I went to meet them. I think my mother went with me. So I saw them one time. Later, when I wasn't even in Israel anymore, I got a letter from the mother begging me if I could maybe have an influence on him so he should go and visit his father. He was in hospital for 4 months in Tel Aviv, and the son didn't think it necessary to come and visit his father one time. So I should influence. I was divorced from him. I should influence. But he wanted to get married. Many times he proposed to me again while I was alone. But of course I never thought of ever. I was so happy to be rid of him. Although I had a hard time. I was depressed. Not because of the divorce,
but too.
And I had, well, the problem is in Israel there's only Orthodox divorce, so it's only when he agreed. So finally, I made him agree to the divorce, but the stipulation is that if it's a boy, only up to the age of 6 he belongs to the mother, then he belongs to the father.
Wow.
So I had him only till the age he was 4 years old when we finally divorced, and so I only had him 2 years. After that, it was
You went back to the father.
The father, but he never wanted him. So we made an arrangement to have him in a foster home, not too far. And I wanted to, I didn't have to pay a penny, but I paid my half share. I wanted to have influence on my son, to be able to have a word to say for him. Because according to the law, I had no rights.
Well,
I wanted him when we were, left the country, I wanted him to come with us. He came with us for a year, then his father made him come back. And he didn't go to him, he put him in a boarding school. And I used to come and visit him more often than his father, who lived in the same country. He was not a good father, he was not a good husband, and unfortunately, so it was a bad experience for a while. But then I met my second husband, who was a wonderful person.
Where did you meet him?
I met him in Tel Aviv. I was going to a friend to visit a friend, and next door neighbors were people who knew a friend of mine. I said, could you do me a favor? I have a little package I want to give them. I went there, and this guy was there, and I don't know how he knew them, and I just wanted to bring the package, and when I was leaving, he left with me, and he asked me for a cup of tea to go out to a coffee shop. We went to sit down and talked a little while, and then he said he would like to meet me again, and he came to Jerusalem to meet me a few times, and that's how we got together. And
your son at that time was in the boarding school?
Yes, and he said, no way, I want him to be with us. And
so your new husband wanted the boy
he wanted him to be with us.
I take it he had no children, or
yes,
was not married?
Yes, he had been married to a non-Jewish woman and had 2 boys. The stories, I tell you, I can speak 2 days.
Okay.
And he came, it was a bad marriage too. And
but he was married long enough to have 2 children. He was married long enough to have
2 children. And they lived together, off and on together for years, many years. But in Israel, when they came there, he said it was very difficult, so he got a job as the principal of a boarding school near Beer Sheva, and they lived near Tel Aviv, so he wasn't really living with her anymore. And then one day she disappeared with the children without telling him a word. She was Dutch. She took the children, left him lots of debts, and without having said goodbye, so he was very upset about it. But no, before that, the Jewish rabbinate had declared his marriage annulled, not divorced, annulled, because she had not been Jewish. So he was kind of a bachelor.
Yeah, he was free.
Yeah. Anyway, we got married, and I came to live there with him near Beer Sheva, but I didn't want him to be my boss, so I found a job teaching in other schools. One was very close to the Gaza border, and by that time I had a car. I was doing quite well. I finished my university studies. I got a master's degree in economics, statistics, and sociology.
Wow, good for you.
And one of my professors was a very famous Nobel Prize person called Martin Buber.
Oh,
have you heard of him?
Of course.
Yeah,
Oh,
he was
yeah.
one of my professors.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We have some of his books.
Yeah, he was a philosopher.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a wonderful teacher. That I wasn't, I didn't get very good grades, but I got my master's degree, and I was working all the time as a statistician. After I got my degree, I was a government statistician. Before that, I worked as an assistant statistician.
What is
But
it?
in Jerusalem, at the government, the Central Bureau of Statistics in Jerusalem. I worked there 9 or 10 years.
Wow.
10 years, yes. And then I left and went to near Beer Sheva and became a teacher. I wasn't a professional teacher, but I managed to teach math and English in
Those were
taught.
courses you kind of felt comfortable with, math and English.
I liked
Yeah,
them.
you liked
yes,
those subjects.
yes, I liked the subject, and I was quite
Good.
good at it. But I wasn't, as a teacher, I wasn't a professional at the time. So
You were not a certified teacher?
not a certified
Okay.
teacher. No, I was a certified statistician, but not a teacher. But they accepted me. It was a high school and an art vocational. What do you call it here? The schools where you learn a trade, a profession.
Trade school, yeah.
Yes.
It's like a trade
Yes,
school.
yes.
I think that's what they call
Yeah, so I taught there, and then I decided I'd like to. My husband was a professor, doctor. He had taught many famous and infamous people in Poland. They made him an enemy of the people when he left. They made him because he deserted his country.
Where was he born?
In Poland.
I know, where in Poland? Do you remember?
Yes,
my folks.
Nowy Sącz.
I'm not familiar with that
No,
town.
he used to be in a nice area. He had an uncle who lived in a beautiful area with ski resort. I forgot.
That's in Poland.
In Poland.
Right.
There he would go for his summer vacation. But his story is also a very sad one. His father passed away when he was 13, and when the Germans were coming, his mother sent him with 2 cousins to go north to Russia to escape. He had a sister who was sickly. She wasn't doing too well, and the mother decided she's staying, and they both were killed in Auschwitz. But he managed to escape, and that's why I told you about that movie, because he fought in the forests in Poland as in the underground, fought the Nazis, got wounded very badly. But then he also went to the Free Polish Army. He changed his name. His name had been Klein, but it was too Jewish, so he changed his name to Kilski, to sound Polish. Yeah, and he was an officer in the Polish resistance army. And then after the war, the Russians were very good to him and let him study. He got his doctorate, and he taught at universities, teaching some of the head government people of Poland.
Wow.
And he was an economist,
Yeah.
the good one. I wasn't. He was. And he spoke 9 languages, so he was a very intelligent, really wonderful.
This was your second husband,
Yeah.
right?
And
With 2 boys, with 2 children.
Yes, but his children, the wife had taken them away, and he didn't.
So
he was alone, but he wanted my son to live with us, and lots of the time he did, and my son loved him very much. He was the real father.
Was your son able to live with them, with both of you?
Sometimes, yes. Whenever his father didn't take him away again.
In other words, his father could have taken him away from you and your new husband.
Yes,
any
because
time.
anytime, and many times he did. Whenever he saw that it was going too well, that we were too comfortable, he would take him away. But later, when my son was older, after 18, he had no more to say. And so my son, we kind of bought him, we promised him all kinds of things that he wanted, so he should come back to us and finish his studies. And
So his father had no control over him after age 18?
No, after 18 he was a free man.
Wow.
Yes, that's how the law goes. Mm.
So he could live with you guys?
Yeah, well, he stayed with us for about a year or 2, or 3 maybe. He got a good education finally, and he studied culinary and hotel business, hotel management, and
That's good.
but he wanted to go back to Israel, and he's back in Israel.
Okay, hold on.